Okay, share what you're comfortable sharing, mute or turn off your camera if that's your level. We do want to be accessible. We're working towards greater accessibility. And so we will be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel with captioning after this event as well. On the bottom of your screen, you will find a chat feature. So if you click on that, that is where we'll be asking you to share your comments, share your questions with us and our speakers today. My colleague Ahmad will be keeping an eye on your questions, and when we get to the discussion portion, he will pull out questions that seem to be recurring, and he will make sure that our speakers and our community address them. Ahmad, I would love for you to do a brief intro so everyone knows who you are.
Hi everyone, my name is Ahmad. I'm working at Edge as a project management coordinator in a summer co-op role. And I'm here to just support the session and make sure it runs as smoothly as possible.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so again, if you have just joined, I would ask that you please mute your mics to reduce the background noise. We are getting a little bit of echo. All right, so a little bit about Edge. Edge is Sheridan's home for entrepreneurs and change makers, and we focus on acting as a bridge into and out of Sheridan. We focus on connecting entrepreneurs to the incredible creativity and innovation expertise at Sheridan and more. And we also work to ensure that entrepreneurs' supports are available and that we know and respect an inclusive approach to entrepreneurship. And we know that that has the power to positively impact our economy and society, and certainly our change makers and entrepreneurs. So in terms of Edge specifically, we do a number of things, from supporting aspiring entrepreneurs and change makers, some of whom I see on our call today, and thank you for joining us. We provide training, mentorship, and workspace. Well, under normal circumstances, our workspace now is virtual, as well as access and supports to funding. We serve a broad community, including Sheridan students, alumni, staff, as well as, again, our communities beyond the walls of Sheridan. Okay, this is what our workspace looks like. And so as you can see, we have a hub space that is typically available to the broader community. We also have a co-working space where our entrepreneurs and change makers in residence reside. And we often host community events as well to, again, ensure that we are very much inclusive in the work that we do in supporting our entrepreneurs. Our programming is fairly robust. We support entrepreneurs and change makers at all stages of startup, from ideation and discovery to validation, as well as ultimately creating efficiencies and scaling. Last year, we supported more than 3,500 participants through our programming with 140 networking, training, and funding events. So we do pride ourselves on being very active in our community and also collaborating with the system. We also have funding opportunities for our community from time to time. This is one that we that's now closed, but was available to our community with the support and generous support of the Community Foundation of Mississauga. And I also see some of our grant recipients from this program on the call, which is great to see as well. Another funding opportunity that we had the privilege of making available to our community is the Advantage Fund. Again, this ran earlier this year and reflects the variety and scope of work that we do. And lastly, I wanted to share a little bit about the Investment Readiness Program. In response, again, in November 2018, the government announced the creation of the Social Finance Fund and the Investment Readiness Program, which is the precursor to the fund. And the intention with the IRP is to prepare social purpose organizations to participate in the social finance market. Here in the Peel and Halton regions, in terms of the IRP mobilization, the Oakville Community Foundation is the lead partner, working with a number of different community foundations in Brant, Halton, Peel, etc., as well as Sheridan College. So we are very proud to be a part of this consortium. And the first round of funding applications closed February of this year. And if you're interested in the investment readiness program, I would recommend checking out the website, as well as going to the Oakville Community Foundation website as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. I'd now like to introduce our speakers and our guests for today, and then we'll jump in and we'll get started. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker, who will be doing most of the talking and sharing today, although both will be very active today and for our next session. Ahmed is inspired by youth in our community who are working tirelessly to make the world a better place. She founded Green Beacon, a social enterprise to enable organizations to localize and integrate UN Sustainable Development Goals. Has developed knowledge, competencies, and experience working in diverse sectors, including finance, higher education, government, and not-for-profit. She serves her community in several capacities, including as the chair of the City of Waterloo's Advisory Committee on Culture and on the board of Waterloo Public Library. Passionate about working with young people, she engages as a mentor in several organizations, including the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Local Pathway Fellowship Program. Is always ready to collaborate, advance the Global Agenda 2030, and we know this because she's been very much an advocate of our work and very supportive of the work that we do here at EDGE and Sheridan as well. We also have Jaipaul Massey-Singh. He will be leading our session on June 11th, although he will also be very interactive today in the Q&A portion. Jaipaul Massey-Singh has made a career out of following his curiosity and seeking opportunities to do engaging and impactful work. He has been fortunate to build experience across a wide range of industries in both private and public sectors, including healthcare, technology, education, and cannabis. He brings a human-centered design approach, which we love, to projects and seeks out initiatives championing sustainability, diversity, inclusion, social innovation, and food security. Jaipaul is also passionate about community leadership and serves as chair of the board at the Brampton Library, leads the City of Brampton's Action Committee on Innovation and Post-Secondary Education. And if I may also include, he is one of the Diversity Fellows for 2020. We are very proud to have you both. I'm going to pass the mic to S to begin our conversation.
Great, thank you, Golnaz. Okay, so can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can hear you, yes.
Excellent, thank you. So we decided to present our topics in two separate webinars because of the sheer amount of information. The way we have structured the webinars is internal operations of an organization and external relationships throughout the localization and institutionalization process. The logic of this is best described by what one of my favorite authors has once said. What we achieve inwardly changes outer reality. In the same line of thinking, what the organization achieves internally affects external reality. Today, we will be discussing how SDGs can be localized internally in an organization. And on June 11th, Jaipaul and I will be discussing influencing and managing relationships and SDGs' role in post-pandemic recovery. We have received the questions you have submitted with your registration and have tried to answer as many as possible as part of this presentation. In today's presentation, I will be discussing three topics. At the end of the presentation, we will have ample time to answer questions and generate a discussion. Let's begin. The three topics we will cover today are 1. UN SDGs Global Indicator Framework. 2. How to map and localize SDGs. 3. Approaches to measuring impact. In 2015, the United Nations introduced a document called Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This document was a result of extensive global consultations and took over 3 years to compose. Agenda 2030, as it is known, envisions a world where poverty has been eradicated, where peace has been achieved, and the world is on a sustainable and resilient path. In the words of the UN, Agenda 2030 is a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. The UN and its member states have an action plan to achieve this vision. This action plan, housed in Transforming Our World, are the Sustainable Development Goals, more commonly known by the abbreviation of SDGs and nicknamed Global Goals. There are 17 SDGs with 169 targets and over 230 indicators and counting. The SDG targets and indicators are aimed at national governments, and this is reflected in the language used for the targets and the indicator metrics. As most countries are adopting the SDGs and localizing them at subnational and city level, the language is being updated within the SDGs framework, which results in indicators being revised and new ones added every year. SDGs framework is a continuous and iterative process, and you will see examples of this at the UN level, where updates are being made to the framework every year, and at the organization level, where localization process tends to get deeper and more integrative with each iteration. Even though SDGs are aimed at national governments, they are expected to be localized and implemented on the ground through municipal governments, businesses, civil society organizations, and by communities at large. So what is meant by mapping and localizing SDGs? Mapping SDGs entail aligning SDG targets and indicators to an organization's existing operations and/or institutional documents, such as a strategic plan. This can be done either as an organization or start on a departmental level and scale up. There is no easy way to do it. On a most elementary level, we will have a list of organizations' core operations or a strategic plan, and we cross-reference and map them to the 169 targets and all the corresponding indicators. There is no magic formula, just sheer hard work. When mapping the SDGs, we look for targets and indicators that are applicable in their current form and can be adopted directly. We also use our creativity, imagination, and deep knowledge to see which targets and or indicators can be adapted to the organization's unique context. Localization is the idea of adapting targets and indicators, in some cases creating new ones to fit the organizational context while still staying true to the spirit of the respective SDG. This is an inclusive and participatory process to ensure that no one is left behind. Once targets and indicators have been localized, the next question is, how will SDGs be institutionalized? That is, how will the aspirations of the SDGs be integrated into the organization in a way that makes it possible to work towards and achieve the respective sustainable development goal or goals? The first step here will be to collect baseline data through localized indicators. This is a current state assessment. Second step is to conduct a gap analysis. This is to demonstrate where the gaps are in current operations and the envisioned future state with respect to localized targets and indicators. Another dimension to the gap analysis is added if the SDGs are mapped and localized to the organization's strategic plan. In this case, the baseline data and backcasting from the future vision of the organization provide a clear picture of organizational strengths and gaps. It is at this stage where the most value is added to the organization as it aligns to the SDGs framework. The space between the known current state and having an envisioned aspirational future state is where systemic and systematic change can be intentionally introduced to align the organization to the global goals and intentionally work towards a world with peace and prosperity for people and planet. Localization and institutionalization of SDGs is a continuous and iterative process. The more data, quantitative and qualitative, is collected on a longitudinal basis, the more information we have to measure and assess impact. SDGs indicators can also be aligned with existing measurement frameworks that an organization utilizes, and so impact can be measured within existing frameworks and models. Organizations that have localized SDGs have been reporting on them for several years have found that with each cycle, their localization process dives deeper within their organization, and SDGs become more and more part of their organizational fabric. To demonstrate the process of localization and the interconnections of the SDGs, we will run through an example. SDG 5, Gender Equality, and its Target 5 is relevant to all organizations. Target 5.5 aims to ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. Indicator 5.5.2 calculates the proportion of women in managerial positions. Specifically looking at women in managerial positions allows an organization to take a deeper look, engage, and understand how the women in those positions experience organizational policies and culture. This engagement could lead to a root cause analysis, resulting in policies more conducive to women's advancement and retainment in the organization. An intersectional pivot can be made to SDG 10, reducing inequalities, to ensure similar process is undertaken with members of other marginalized groups. Target 10.3 aspires to ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, including by eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and action in this regard. Indicator 10.31 calculates proportion of population, reporting having personally felt discriminated against or harassed in the previous 12 months on the basis of a ground of discrimination prohibited under international human rights law. Target 10.3 and Indicator 10.3.1 can be localized to organizational context by focusing on organizational policies and practices. A natural pivot from there is application of SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, looking specifically at Target 5, equal pay for work of equal value. Target 8.5 strives to, by 2030, achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including for young people and persons with disabilities, and equal pay for work of equal value. Indicator 8.5.1 calculates the average hourly earnings of employees by sex, age, occupation, and persons with disabilities. Here, Target 8.5 and Indicator 8.5.1 can be localized based on the organizational policies. Since localization is an inclusive and participatory process, conversations should be facilitated to understand how equal pay for work of equal value is understood and how it can be implemented most equitably. As the SDG principles are integrated in the organization through iterative and continuous process, excuse me, they become part of the organization's ethos and culture. Localization and institutionalization of SDGs at an organizational level contributes to achieving the SDGs at the national and global levels.
Yes, can I interject here? I think it would be a good place maybe to stop once you've gone through the SDGs and maybe see if people have any questions, specific and startups that maybe we could answer. Is that a fair stopping point?
So this actually concludes my presentation.
Perfect timing.
Yes, I wanted to keep it brief because I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for questions and really generate a discussion. So just to recap, we talked about the foundation of the UN SDGs Global Indicator Framework. We walked through the process of localization and institutionalization of SDGs within an organization. And we talked about some of the approaches available to measure impact. And now let's, we are open for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, so if we could transition, we want this to be relevant to your event or the work that you do. So you do have the opportunity to unmute your microphones. But if you do have questions, why don't we start with maybe questions in the chat? And if you do have specific questions that you want to ask, we'll ask you to unmute your microphone and please share. We want this part to be interactive. We have a good chunk of time to actually explore both Jaipaul and ask some specifics around the work that you're doing.
Can you explain more on just social enterprise to the UN Sustainable Development, like for someone like me who doesn't know a lot about that? I don't know if you heard me.
Is this Samantha talking?
No, this is Carlene. I was actually.
Oh, hi, Carlene.
I'm part of the LEAP program, and you spoke at our last weekend, so I'm here.
Perfect. So if I can hear your question correctly, is as a social, how might social entrepreneurs integrate UN Sustainable Development Goals within their practice? Is that a correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. So I'll turn it over to Jaipaul and ask if you could maybe give some specifics, maybe give us the foundations. If you are a social entrepreneur and you're starting out and you want to have impact in different ways, where would you start with the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
My recommendation would be to start with your mission and your objectives as an organization, as a social enterprise, and align those with the SDGs and see which SDGs align the most with your organization and your purpose. So SDGs framework should be adaptable to your organization rather than the organization working towards the SDGs in some respects. And so once you have aligned the SDGs, you will examine the targets and indicators and where is it that you can make an impact based on those targets and indicators are. And if you feel that the existing targets and indicators don't cover the areas that you want to impact as a social enterprise, then we can work with you in creating new ones. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I have another question. As a social enterprise, is that something that's going to be helping the community in some way? Is that the point of like being a part of the SDG, as you were saying? Like, so my business venture is a podcast for Grenadians, and so I'm trying to reach out to the community and educate them more with my podcast. I'm not sure if this is a social enterprise, but I just wanted to learn more about this organization. That's why I'm on this call. So.
Are there any special topics that you cover in your podcast?
I haven't figured that out yet. Like, I mean, I've only created 2 shows. It's a new thing for me. I just started Nutmeg Nation in May. And so I'm doing my research and I'm learning more about Grenada than I knew before, because I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Canada, but I think it's a niche topic, and so that's why I'm going with it.
So 2 pieces of advice I would have is to see what, if you're aiming at Canadians in Grenada, if looking at what the government of Grenada is doing in respect to SDGs and how you can help with the agenda and progressing the agenda there. And also looking at what are the needs of the community here in Canada, and then aligning those needs to the SDGs and talking about the needs and framing it within the SDG framework. Jaipaul, would you like to add to that?
Certainly. I think, I think the notion of a podcast or any kind of social enterprise, if your objective is in making an impact on a particular community or with respect to a particular issue that you've identified, and you're looking for alignment with sustainable development goals, what I would suggest you do is go back to, and this is where I sort of started off the conversation with, is, you know, what are your mission and vision for the initiative that you're taking on? Look at what your strategic plan is and how you are looking to measure the impact of the initiatives you're taking on. once you have a clear idea of what you exist to do and what it is you're looking to achieve, then it's an opportunity to look at the Sustainable Development Goal framework and identify, are there targets and indicators within that that you can use as part of your outcome measures? Any enterprise, whether you're talking about a social one or otherwise, has to be measured in some way to assess whether you're achieving what you're setting out to do. I think an easy place to start is to look at how you're measuring yourself, and can you utilize SDG indicators as a means of measuring your progress, and recognizing that in a year one scenario, that's going to be very difficult, or a day one scenario, that's going to be very difficult. But as you build out a plan for your next 1 to 2 to 5 years, can you progressively attain the targets and indicators that the UN has put out there as a framework, and perhaps even starting with just 1 or 2 targets as a starting point, and then broadening as you go.
Jaipaul, we have a number of questions directed to your comment. If you could please expand. Can you talk a bit more about measurement and how to measure impact? And there are a couple of people saying that this is the conceptual nature of what we're talking about can be a little bit challenging, right? And so can you perhaps use a specific example? So let's say gender equality is one specific area that may be a focus. What would be some very practical tips using an example to kind of articulate or implement what you just spoke to? You're on mute. If you could please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I apologize for that. No, thank you. So when we're talking about, so if we're going to use the gender one as an example, an example in there could be to say, within the organization, we want to promote opportunities. And again, it all comes down to what the objective of your organization is. But something as broad as a 5.1 type of measurement around ending forms of discrimination against women and girls. That's a target. There's a number of indicators in place that could achieve that, but you can start setting your own indicators within the framework of what applies to the operation and the culture of your organization. So if we're talking about ending forms of discrimination, that can be in the form of, and this is where the reflective part of it comes in. Is it within the hiring of your organization? Is it within the promotion of opportunities for women in leadership roles in your organization? Is it about fair wage and equity for those who are in your organization? Is it about identifying individuals who are in need in your organization, providing appropriate supports to allow them to have thriving careers or make contributions to the organization? I don't think there's a one answer to that. It's taking that objective, looking back within the organization, saying, if our organization, for instance, is dedicated to social enterprise whose focus is upon ending discrimination or promoting gender equality, then the operations of the organization may align directly with what are our activities on a day-to-day basis, may align very much with an SDG. However, if you're a business whose day-to-day work is not necessarily focused on gender equality, but as an organization you want to ensure that is something you promote, then it's about looking at your internal practices. Like I said, it could be HR, it could be your hiring, it could be leadership roles and opportunity. It could be how you identify partners and who we work with. Do we work with organizations who in turn support gender equality? I think your supply chain is one of those places you could look. So I think it really depends on how focused you are on that SDG as part of your core activities as a business or organization, or if it's something that you feel are values that your business want to implement. Does that help?
If you'd like to type in a yes, that would be great. I'm just going to go through the Sean, I don't know if you would like to use your mic, but you had a question around offering a real example. Would you like to speak specifically to maybe a question related to this that we can explore with you?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. When I went through the online material for the SDGs and listening to the presentation, it being the UN, it's very high level, and even though Jaipaul, you offered an example, if I'm trying to, and I'll use myself as an example in this case, if my endeavor is trying to help men with masculinity and unpack what that means and vulnerability, how would that impact day-to-day business and my overall business, would I, and forgive my ignorance, would I be able to attach a little logo at the bottom of my webpage? Or how is it, like, what am I going to do that will align with these goals?
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate you giving a more specific example. So the nature of the organization in and of itself is to promote healthy masculinity. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the premise correctly.
Yes, it's a healthy masculinity. Masculinity is a very broad term, but let's just use that as a general starting point. Yes.
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot that you can pull out from there. So ultimately, I would take it back to, like I said, right from the beginning, what the organization exists to do, and the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis and a year-to-year basis to those activities. How are you measuring the effectiveness of what you're doing? How are you measuring? Is that in the form of certain populations you're trying to reach? If you're reducing toxicity overall, how are you measuring that reduction in toxicity, or how are you measuring a more educated group of men who you're working with on a day in, day out basis? Those base measures on how you measure your success is where I would first go, and then start looking at where can we start aligning SDG frameworks to the work you're doing. In particular, I think in this case, looking at gender equality, where are the measurements around reducing violence, for instance, perhaps against women could be one that you could take out as a byproduct of toxic masculinity. One of the concerns we have is systemic violence against women in our communities and in our homes. And so that aligns now with an SDG goal that we have, 5.2. This is the piece that we want to address. And here's the work we're going to do along the way to do that. And then that defines your activities. Now you can work backward from there to say, okay, is that about having a workshop? Is that about having a set of classes? Is it about having some kind of intervention program? This might in turn result in figuring out who you align with. Is this about partnerships with sexual assault and rape crisis centers in order to introduce more programming or partnerships to strengthen your organization? Your activities can be determined based on figuring out what your targets are, but first and foremost, I wouldn't go with, let me find the SDG goal that I'm interested in and build an organization around that. You have your organization, you have your purpose, you know what it is that you're looking to measure. Let's find an SDG goal that helps you measure your progress along the arc of what it is you're looking to do. And that's a very easy and obvious one because it aligns with your core purpose. Along the way, as your organization commits to this, you may take on other elements of this. It could be stuff that's tangential to the population you're serving. You may identify along the way, for instance, that men who are most likely to need the interventions that your program offer may also be individuals who are in poverty or have educational issues, and you may start to broaden then the SDGs that you want to bring into as part of your measurement to encompass other aspects that address the population that you're looking to serve. Or you may just decide fundamentally that we just want to be an organization who, in addition to our core purpose, also does so in a way that's clean and sustainable, does so in a way that promotes the health of our employees. And you may bring in SDGs that are about your business operations as well. Is that a little more instructive there, Sean?
Oh, that's an enormous amount of information for me to run away with. So thank you.
With respect to promoting the SDGs, and so I'm going to flip that over to Ash because she has way more expertise in that than me.
Thank you. So just to add to that when we are localizing and institutionalizing SDGs, there are always two perspectives to look at it. One is organizationally. What are you doing organizationally, and how can you localize it organizationally? And second, outward facing. So in the operations or services that you're providing to your clients, how are the SDGs being localized and adapted to that context? So you're providing an example by doing it internally and also by doing it externally and providing an example to the community that you live in.
Great, thank you both. How do we continually improve? So we've localized, maybe we've focused on one that makes sense given our strategic focus, vision, mission, the work that we do. How can we continually improve upon? Like, do you have any suggestions on what we might think about to continue improving upon the impacts and the measurement?
Sure. So with the examples that I use with the gender equality, and looking at women in managerial positions. So there are organizations that I'm working with right now where the first step is to figure out just the quantitative data of how many women are in the managerial positions, and then having conversations about do we like the number, do we want to change that, do we want to have more women, do we want to have more parity, and then having the deeper conversations of how do we do it. This is a long-term process, it's a continuous process, and it's an iterative process. So the more time is spent and the more resources are allocated and the more time is spent thinking about this and institutionalizing practices to achieve the targets and the indicators, the more deeper the integration tends to be. Does that answer the question?
It does. It's like it's really having very meaningful, thoughtful, intentional goals, and then embedding how you measure and evaluate within the structure, like thoughtfully within the structure of your organization. Is that fair?
Yes, and approaching it as a process. So it won't happen overnight. It's a process that takes months or years to happen.
It's a continuous improvement exercise, and it's so how on whatever cadence the organization evaluates its organizational progress against its outcome measures or its impacts, whether that be at minimum on an annual basis, but hopefully more regularly than that. Where are we in respect to progress within those goals? Absolutely reflecting at least on an annual basis. Has the landscape changed in any material way that we should be reviewing the goal, reviewing the standard? Can we accelerate? Do we need to re-strategize? Unfortunately, sometimes, when we set goals of this nature, they can become static. And if they're not reviewed regularly and discussed regularly, we risk missing them because we're not making the micro adjustments on a day-to-day basis to ensure that we're making progress toward the goal through the form of activity. I would recommend, if these are goals that are important, and this is why they should be aligned with your mission and values right from the beginning, that they be something that get embedded into whatever managerial meetings you have, that you have a champion within the organization who's responsible for the monitoring and communication of progress against those goals. If this is if this is important to the organization, then it should be treated as a core as much as any other business process. So it needs to be discussed regularly, reviewed regularly, and ensured that, like I said, that the goals are being adjusted as well as circumstances within the organization or external to the organization shift also.
And can you both, actually, let's start with a few more examples, and then I'd love to come back to the measurement side as well, because that seems to be quite a recurring topic here in the chat. So Sanjeet, are you comfortable taking the mic to share a bit about what you do and your question here in the chat?
Yeah, for sure. So just to give you a bit of background on my initiative, I'm working on something that it basically turns, it's an online program that helps. So really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to increase social entrepreneurship and the number of social entrepreneurs in our community. And when I look at the UN SDGs, I'm not sure exactly which SDG our initiative aligns to, because what we're doing here is we're creating a ripple effect that would hopefully allow other people to take on other UN SDGs and implement that in their community. So we're kind of supporting everyone to implement their own SDGs. And when I look at my own organization, I'm trying to figure out where I fit in.
Can I interject here? Because I think the example that Sanjeet just gave is very similar to work we did with S at Edge. We're an incubator, we serve entrepreneurs, yet we have our own strategic plan and vision and mission. And so we were facing a very similar question. So I'll pass it on to S and Jaipaul to comment.
Great, thank you. So just hearing about your external operations, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, that would be the SDGs that aligns externally. And then you can also look at what SDGs are aligned internally and what aligns with your strategic plan. Does that answer the question?
I'm still unclear.
Can I interject with kind of the work we did at Edge? Yeah, so Sanjeet, what we did with S is we took our strategic plan, which encompassed our mission and vision statements, as well as our strategic priorities. And we then mapped the SDGs. right? So with S's help. And so that helped us narrow down on 5 or 6 that we felt aligned. But then to Jaipaul's point, it's really about what is our core impact, right? At this point, if we don't want to SDG wash and we want to be really focused, which ones make sense for us to start with? And so we know that through the work that we do, for example, economic growth, like the more successful our ventures are in contributing to the economy and hiring and doing impactful work, then we've done well. And so we went through narrowing further on the ones that we want to start with, and it's still work in progress as a team. We're still having conversations around what that means in terms of specific impact measures and whatnot. But that's how we started with our strategic documents. But again, I'll pass it on to S and Jaipaul if you want to add anything to make this more specific for us.
So I just have a question. Are there any specific types of organizations that you work with, or any specific populations that you're focused on?
No, it's not. It's a general program for anyone. And again, it's the whole purpose is just taking anyone's self-interest and turning that into something that will impact the community. So it's intentionally broad on purpose.
So SDG 3, good health and well-being, would be something that that we can look at together, of how your organization might align to, because it seems like you're enabling other people to do good in the community, right?
Yeah, for sure. And my own challenge is when I look at the UN SDGs, I'm looking at it right now, for instance, there's several of these things that we indirectly touch upon. And I think that's the issue, is that do we look at the things we indirectly impact, or do we look at the one or two things that we directly impact? And when it comes to direct impact, I still have a bit of trouble finding out, which specific goal we should be aligning with.
So one of the things that I would recommend, one of the next steps would be to look at your strategic plan and other institutional documents and understand what services you're offering and how you're offering them, and then align those with the SDG targets and indicators. To you, Jaipaul.
Thanks. Yeah, so first, Sanjeet, that sounds like an awesome initiative. So good for you for getting that going. I think anything that's promoting more people taking action and getting engaged is a positive thing to do. So good on you and the folks you're working with. I would echo where S went with this. I think the 17 is where I'd probably start my exploring. A lot of the language within that is around on a more national and international level. But as you think about how those pieces get localized and start thinking about them at a more granular and ground level, I think there's a lot of language in there and purpose that might align with what it is that you're doing around ensuring that people have a voice, that there's more engagement and activity, ensuring that there's partnerships are being enhanced in the community, which sounds fundamentally like what it is that you're going to achieve by the work you're doing. And I think that's a reasonable starting point. What I would be interested, if I was working with you, would be to look at how things develop over time. I suspect that as you get into the weed, how far down the road are you with your initiative right now?
So we began our testing about, let's say, 6 months ago.
Okay,
and
so you're really new.
Yeah, and with this particular initiative. And we're now, I guess, getting out of our beta testing phase and getting to something that's a little bit more broadly applicable as an alpha version of our product, essentially.
That's great. So for where you are now, that might be the starting point, because that aligns with what your purpose is. And I suspect that as you start to engage clientele and start to work with organizations, I wouldn't be surprised if we were having this conversation a year from now that you had a really clear understanding of other SDG areas of impact that you were interested in based on who you're serving, and whether it be communities who are marginalized, whether it be based on gender, whether it be around, oh, we've discovered that there's a particular issue for whom we've had to further develop our tools and our resources to support. So if I were you, I would look at something, like I said, around 17. I agree with us on that. I would try to figure out how that language localizes at a community level that for you. What are you doing to promote, particularly, like I said, that engagement and partnership component of it? And I would keep an eye on it. I think as you develop your business plan over the coming year, if you haven't even launched yet, I suspect you're going to learn a lot in the coming months that will allow you to realize these are the other areas that we can bring in both internally and externally to start promoting SDGs within our organization. I think your initiative's a great one. I think your thinking is really good. My comment would be is I think you're early to know.
All right. Yeah, thank you. This is really helpful.
Wonderful.
So can I
Let me
just add?
interject really quick. Oh, go ahead, Ass.
Can I just said the fact that you're early, it's also a really good point to lay a strong foundation now, so you can work intentionally towards specific goals, beginning now.
Great, thank you. MJ, you have put in a couple of comments. I don't know if you'd like to use your mic to maybe give more context around the question you have.
Sure.
Thank you.
Am I unmuted? Yes. My question has got to do with actually external impact. So I think the first thing one of Jaipaul you said was, well, you know what you want to measure when you're out in the world. I think that's what people don't know. So I work with a lot of social enterprises as a startup coach, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
You're right. It's definitely more easily said than done at times. But I think, if I'm understanding your comment correctly, MJ, and thanks for asking, I think, so correct me if I'm misinterpreting here. To me, that's not an SDG piece. I think that's a truism of social enterprises and startups, and for what it's worth, even mature organizations as they evolve and grow. Understanding what it is that our purpose is, why we're doing it, and how we measure that, I think I think it's critical that we think about that through an SDG lens. But I think that's a truism for organizations fundamentally, because long before I had ever heard the acronym regarding SDGs, this was part of the work I was doing and continue to do, is help organizations understand why they're doing the work they're doing and how they measure that impact. So I don't want to take anything away from what you're saying. I think you're absolutely right, but I don't know that that's an SDG observation so much as that's an observation around why businesses need support from organizations like Edge in the first place, is to help them discover and frame that and find the resources in order to make the impacts they need to make. So I do think that's a critical piece to figure out. I think the SDGs, where they're powerful, is they can provide a framework, they can provide some insights to help an organization that might be struggling to articulate or who might be struggling to figure out how to measure, but knows what they want to do, some guidance on how to articulate and identify some numbers or some outcome measures that they want to localize. But I think fundamentally, if you don't know why you exist or how you're going to measure that, I don't think the SDG solves that problem for you. I think it can help you, but I think it's work that needs to be done within the organization. And I applaud you for working with organizations who need that kind of help as startups, because I think that's a critical piece. And I think the SDG is a framework we can bring to that measurement, but I don't think it takes the place of that work. It has to be done no matter what.
Jaipaul, this is Golna, just building on that question, and I'm going to wear my Edge member hat now as opposed to Edge staff, given that I have a question for both of you. So we had a session on impact measurement a while ago, and one of the things that I've been building out is my logic model around inputs, programming, short-term, medium-term, long-term kind of outcome measurements, et cetera, and impact. So can you maybe expand a little bit around how that tool might serve us if you feel it's connected to this conversation or not? Like, do you have any specifics on where someone like MJ or others might start around looking at these things?
Yes, I know you love talking about logic models. Do you want to kick off?
Sure. So yes, I think what using a logic model in this particular scenario helps because it deconstructs the steps needed to achieve specific indicators and targets. It is an involved process, and it definitely requires a lot of intentional thinking about what you're doing and what you want to achieve. I think for people who are familiar with logic models, it's definitely helpful. For with organizations that I've worked with who are not familiar with logic models, it just adds a layer of complexity. So I think it depends on your preference. Jaipaul?
Yeah, I think the logic model piece is extremely useful, and I think developing an appropriate logic model for an organization and understanding all the interactions and relationships that the organization needs to consider as part of delivering its work is absolutely useful. And S is right to say it is sophisticated, and I don't know that it's onerous, but it definitely takes a lot of work and intentionality and dedicated resource to do that. That said, I would not run away from that work, no matter the size of your organization. It's been my experience that the process of developing a logic model is as valuable as having the logic model articulated itself. The exercise of sitting down and identifying who are our partners, what are the external factors that determine our success, what are the internal resources we need to have, how can we start to develop some sustainability within the organization. Just going through those conversations as a leadership team, particularly, and I think this is the critical piece that we haven't talked about here yet today, and it circles back to the comment that MJ first asked, and I wish I'd said that at that time too. Engaging your partners and your stakeholders and the people you impact, doing this type of exercise, whether it's identifying, to MJ's initial question about your impacts external to the organization, or whether we're using the logic model as the process to get there. Either way, it's about engaging, the many diverse voices that you touch upon, both within your organization, external to the organization in the form of your partners, in the form of your clients and the communities whom you're serving. That simple exercise will help to shape this. And now, whether we're talking about that output ultimately being a logic model, or that the output of that exercise being a mapping exercise back to an SDG and understanding how you localize it, that fundamental work is what's going to get you to where you need to go. And as an organization, if you're struggling right now to understand how you measure, the first place to start is reaching out to the people who you're trying to impact and understand what their needs are and understand how effective you've been in what you've done so far. And I think whether we're talking about logic models or SDGs at that point, you're going to start laying the foundation for impact measurement that works.
Great, thank you. So we have time for one more question. And, we will pick up on additional questions at our next session for sure. We want to make this as valuable and useful for everyone. There's a question around, do you think it's ethical to overtly market the fact that you're working to align with SDGs? So I think this question is maybe coming at like, how do you ensure that you're not SDG washing, number one? And also secondly, what are some practices for communicating SDGs out externally and kind of the impact that you're seeking to have? I know that's a topic that Jaipaul, you'll be speaking to at our next session as well, but do you have any initial thoughts or nuggets you'd like to share around what we'll be covering on the 11th?
Do you want to take the lead on this? I know you understand this area a little bit better than me.
Sure, thank you. So the first part of the question, it is ethical as long as you are doing it with a fair intention of actually doing the work and not just doing it for advertising purposes. The second part of the question, we'll be covering that in the next presentation, and Jaipaul can speak more to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and Golnaz, can you just repeat that second part? I just want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around it properly.
So I'll read the question exactly. So it's, do you think it's ethical to overtly market the fact that you're working to align with SDGs? To me, it feels almost dangerous to promote to customers that you're trying to reduce inequality, in a sense that you're fighting the issue also implies that equality was not the norm otherwise. I don't know, Josh, do you want to unmute your mic and maybe expand a little bit to make sure that we answer your specific question?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to tackle kind of the issue of like, if you kind of all this SDGs, we're now aware of that, and now we're like fighting inequality, for example. I feel like people are going to start asking, well, what were you doing before? Like, what were you doing otherwise? As you start addressing the issue, it starts implying that perfect equality wasn't the norm before. Like, you were doing something else before that wasn't aligning with that, and now you're shifting yourself to now align with this. So it kind of sounds dangerous, and people might start questioning that. So I'm curious how you might tackle that issue.
Certainly, no, that's a good question, and I appreciate it. So thanks, Josh, for asking it. I mean, you need to I think, is part of the work that you're doing to embed, and this is why we're going to hear time and again, it's coming back to that mission and your strategic plan. There's a reason why you're doing this that should align with what it is your organization is trying to achieve. That's based in an outcome you're trying to accomplish. That's based in some data that you've collected along the way that's identified for you that this is a problem you need to solve. Whether it's an external problem, like kind of like what Sean's taking on through his organization, he wants to change the world, or whether it's an internal issue, as sort of the scenario you're describing, where we may want to make a pivot within our organization to make it a more equitable or safe place to be. And I think as long as you are, so first, I think you have a moral obligation to act and to do the right thing fundamentally. But as long as it's coming out of an exercise that's iterative, that has involved engagement, and that is based in some data to show that here's why we're doing this, I don't think you should run from the notion that you're trying to get better. I do believe, and this is more me speaking from my heart than from my head, perhaps, but I do think organizations and customers and individuals and clients want to work with organizations who want to improve. And I think it's okay to say, we want to move the needle from where we were to where we want to be. It's not an acknowledgement of failure. It's not to say you were previously a bad actor, to say that we now want to really focus on this particular area because we know this is a place where we want to make improvements. And in fact, by doing so, what you're doing, you're furthering the conversation around that particular issue. So I think if it aligns with what your strategic objectives are, if it's involved good engagement from the people you're trying to serve, and you have metrics to prove, to show that, yeah, we may have been good, but now we want to be great, or we were terrible, and now we want to get good. Both of those stories are good stories, and I think you shouldn't run away from explaining that you've identified an opportunity to improve as an organization, and you want to take some leadership on that issue. So if I'm understanding, I think what you're asking is not a technical question. You're asking a question around how do people perceive you? And my answer to that question is I would perceive you positively.
Can I also just add to that? You can also portray this as you joining a global framework and a global movement to do the right things. So you can add a hopeful note to the operations you're doing. Hopefully that helps.
So much. Thanks, Jess. Hopefully that helps, Josh. So very quickly, there's a question around, do organizations need to be a social enterprise status? We don't really have a legal structure for social enterprise in Canada, but I guess the question is, can any type of organization align with SDGs regardless of legal structure? My view is yes, but I'd like to know from the experts, can you be any legal structure, whether you're a sole proprietor, incorporated, for-profit or not-for-profit, etc., in order to align with the SDGs?
You can be any structure. I'm working with the municipal governments, businesses, social enterprises, civil society organizations. So the answer is no, you don't have to be any specific structure.
And I know we're running out of time. There's an important question that Marwa has raised around how organizations can work with government. And I know, for example, locally in Halton and Peel, there's some work being done, if I'm not mistaken. So how can organizations work with government or other organizations to get the SDGs advanced? And then how to localize them. Is this something that you'll be addressing next week? So specifically, she says, and get the community awareness raised in terms of achieving, especially with working on sustainable cities and community goals. So any thoughts on that, or will you be covering that on the 11th as well?
We are covering that next week.
Okay, great. So we want to do that topic justice, Marwa, so that the speakers will be diving into that in more depth. Jaipaul, did you want to add anything, or S?
Just that we really appreciate all the questions, and we have a pretty clear idea of what we want to do on the 11th, but we left room to pivot and ensure we're addressing the questions and themes that came out from today. So if you found today's conversation to be interesting, or maybe we didn't get to the issue in full that you wanted us to today, I know there's been a couple of comments in the chat about some more specific examples, and we are going to talk about some case studies next week. We're going to try to encompass and address anything that didn't get captured today. We'll put some intention into making sure it's captured next week.
Perfect. And Jaipaul, there is a question around aligning SDGs with a sound marketing strategy, and I know that's something that we will be covering as well. Any guidance on how to be successful with the IRP funding program? Shelley, that is a separate conversation. Thank you so much for asking that. The IRP at this point, and I think Renee, if she's still on the call, may be able to comment further. When that particular opportunity, she's not on the call, okay. So when the IRP is open again for funding applications, there will be information sessions and whatnot, both from the community foundations and EDGE. So we do suggest that you keep an eye out, we will be posting more information on our website when that opportunity is open again. Okay, so thank you everyone for all your great questions. We know that the SDGs can be very conceptual and can be difficult to wrap our heads around, which is why we are having these sessions, and we've tried to make them as interactive as possible. As Jaipaul said, we will collect your questions that weren't answered today, and we will certainly for next week make this even more interactive as we kind of dig into case studies and more examples. So we look forward to having you join us again next week. We'd like to thank everyone for making time to be here today, and I'd like to thank our speakers as well for the great content and examples. And again, we look forward to seeing everyone again next week on June 11th from 10 to 11. If you have not registered for that session, please do. And you're more than welcome to email me directly or Slack me if you're a member, and we'll make sure any other questions are added. We may even, Jaipaul, are you still thinking we might circulate a questionnaire to harness more questions from people?
Yes, yeah, we'll get something to you, Gulnaz, probably by this time tomorrow. And if you'd like to circulate it, just to capture as best we can questions and themes, so that we're being as useful to everyone as we can be next week.
That's great. So please keep an eye out. We will send a survey out with some questions to make sure that we clarify anything from today that needs clarifying and really hone in on your specific needs. So there's a question on how do I register for the next session? Great question. So if you go into our EDGE events page, same place you went to register for this event. If you click on the Eventbrite link, you can select June 11th date, and you can register for next week's session through our EDGE events page. Ahmad, if you wouldn't mind, before we wrap up, maybe pasting the URL in the chat for us, just to make this process as easy as possible for everyone. Cole, thank you so much. So the link is already there. Amazing teamwork. All right, so we don't want to hold you up any further. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see all of you back on the 11th. Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
And we can stop recording. I'm just going to hang back until everyone has left the room. Thank you.